This week, an October surprise of sorts came when the New York Times published audio of an interview with Donald Trump's longest-serving former chief of staff, retired four-star General John Kelly. Here is Kelly's response when asked by reporter Michael Schmidt if Kelly believes Trump is a fascist.
But certainly the former president is in the far-right area. He's certainly an authoritarian, admires people who are dictators. He has said that. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, for sure.
And there's more. Kelly said his boss had a penchant for bringing up a dubious figure in world history, one who was responsible for the genocide of 6 million. Trump apparently felt, quote unquote, his generals should be more like Adolf Hitler's, and said, quote, Hitler did some good things.
First of all, you should never say that. But if you knew what Hitler was all about from the beginning to the end, everything he did was in support of his racist, fascist life, philosophy, so that nothing he did you could argue was good. It was certainly not done for the right reason.
What would he say when you would lay that out to him?
He'd just, that'd be the end of the conversation usually.
Now, Kelly goes on to confirm previous reports that Trump would refer to members of the U.S. Armed Forces as, quote, suckers and losers, and that he favored deploying the U.S. military to shoot American citizens during protests. In response to the bombshell revelations, a Trump campaign spokesman said, quote, John Kelly has totally beclowned himself with these debunked stories he has fabricated because he failed to serve as president while working as chief of staff and currently suffers from a debilitating case of Trump derangement syndrome. Ah, yes, any criticism of the former president must mean the person doing the criticizing is mentally ill. There's another word for that. It's called gaslighting. So let's remind folks of some of the other top-level cabinet officials Trump hired that have since come out with warnings about his character. Let's run down the other top folks with Trump derangement syndrome. Former Vice President Mike Pence, former Defense Secretaries Jim Mattis and Mark Esper, former National Security Advisor John Bolton, former Attorney General William Barr, former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, former Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley, and the list goes on and on and on. Looks like the TDS wing of the mental health institution is going to fill up fairly rapidly. Perhaps all of these cabinet officials should appear at a televised news conference together to express their concerns about their former boss and explain to the American public why they became alarmed once they worked for him, witnessed his thought process, and saw how he made his decisions. Vice President Kamala Harris wasted no time seizing on these quotes as a campaign issue.
This is a window into who Donald Trump really is, from the people who know him best, from the people who worked with him side by side in the Oval Office and in the Situation Room. So the bottom line is this. We know what Donald Trump wants. He wants unchecked power. The question in 13 days will be, what do the American people want?
Now, most voters have made up their minds already. Many have voted early, but for that small sliver of undecideds, how will this play? Will they shrug it off as, quote, made up? Will they conclude that these sentiments are horrible, but not horrible enough to outweigh concerns over immigration and the high prices of gas and eggs? We have less than 2 weeks to find all of that out. And that's tonight's opening shot.
Coming up on Paris on Politics.
Down to the wire. Who has the advantage in the presidential contest 2 weeks out? A view from the ground in the battleground states of Wisconsin and Michigan. And a civic watchdog on how Chicago can close a $1 billion budget deficit. Paris on Politics is next.
This is Paris on Politics from Fox 32 Chicago.
Welcome to Paris on Politics, where we go behind the headlines and beyond the spin. The early votes are being cast, and Election Day is now 12 days away. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the contest couldn't be tighter. Joining us to go behind the latest polling are Democratic strategist Pete Giangreco and former Illinois Republican Party chairman Pat Brady. Guys, always good to have you here. Pete, I'll start with you. The national polling, the swing state polling in the presidential contest is essentially a dead heat right now. Some of the polls in the blue wall states have Harris up by less than 1%. Does this square with what you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, I think this is as tight an election as you're ever going to see. And there's quirks in each of the states that maybe the polling doesn't take into account. Wisconsin, for example, about 330,000 people are going to show up on Election Day, register and vote. They've never been polled. You can't poll them. And they generally break about 60-40 for the Democrats. So that might be the insurance policy there. In Pennsylvania, you're seeing the vote by mail numbers, a lot more Republicans voting early, but a very high percentage of them are just Election Day voters that are casting early. You look in the Democratic numbers, you have a lot more people who haven't voted before or who are, skip elections. So there may be some pieces that give Democrats a little bit of hope, but these polls have never been closer in any race.
Pat Brady, who do you think should feel more comfortable right now, the Harris camp or the Trump camp?
I'd say advantaged a little bit Harris for the reasons you just mentioned. And there's some other quirks and like I know we were talking about North Carolina probably not a reach for Democrats, but they have Republicans do a horrible governor candidate running. He's on
Mark
15,
Robinson.
Mark Robinson on 15. And you go to Arizona, Ruben Gallego running for Senate against Kerry Lake is up double digits. So there's some stuff underneath the surface that might, I think, tend to lean towards the Democrats. I thought it was advantage Democrats from 11 minutes into Donald Trump's acceptance speech at the convention when he went off script and started talking nonsense.
About Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah, whatever. But I think in the last couple of weeks, you've seen it tighten up, which it normally does. But I'd say slight advantage Harris. And these polls, you can't measure enthusiasm. And
we have some of those polls. Let's go ahead and show some of those polls. Pete, there's a lot of reports that Democratic strategists are nervous right now. Are you nervous?
You're not allowed to be a Democratic strategist unless you're nervous. It's what we do. But I think a lot of that comes from 2016, where a lot of people thought Hillary had it in the bag. The major mistake there was Hillary's campaign actually stopped polling in the blue wall, didn't know it was coming. So the problem with polling, even if you get the response rates right and the bias and do the Trump voters not, what it all comes down to in a poll is to guess at who's going to turn out. In 2012, remember, Karl Rove went crazy when Fox called Ohio correctly for Obama. It's because he had the wrong turnout model. Democrats made the same problem in 2016 when they were shocked that Hillary lost because they had the turnout model wrong.
And that's historic, right?
Yeah, that happens. That's every poll that's ever been taken. If you can't
So are you looking
guess,
at polls now that have the correct turnout model, you think?
Nobody knows until they turn out.
Until they turn out, of course.
Everybody missed the Trump turnout surge in 2016. It fundamentally shifted the electorate. Black voters didn't turn out as strongly for Hillary. Labor households did not perform as well for Hillary as they did for Obama, and boom, 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 you lose the 3 blue wall states.
Pat, you mentioned this race tightening, as most races do, but are there missteps the Harris campaign has made, given that she had this wave of enthusiasm and it seems to have evaporated?
I think the one misstep is when she could not answer what she would have done differently as vice president. And the right answer was, yeah, we understand we didn't do as good a job on immigration, but I'm going to do X, Y, Z going forward. She kind of dropped the ball there. And I think if she does lose, that might be the turning point in the momentum for her in the last couple of weeks. And
we should stipulate, Pat, you're a longtime Republican, lifelong Republican, but you are not a Trump supporter.
I'm a conservative.
You're a conservative.
Yeah,
well, and I want to bring up these comments from Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, saying he believes Trump fits the definition of fascist and that Trump kept bringing up, quote unquote, Hitler did good things. Why can't my generals be more like Hitler's? Are you surprised? I guess nothing should surprise us at this point, but at the non-response from the members of your party that still do support Trump.
Yeah, he's still baked. He got 46.1% in 16 and 46.7 in 20. So his support is kind of baked in. And the ridiculous comments about Arnold Palmer over the weekend. These things are just outrageous, but it doesn't seem to affect anyone. But I do think if there's a mistake on the Republican side, I think Trump has spent too much time trying to get out his male base and not concentrating on broadening or making the tent a little bigger, and that may, if he loses, I think that will be the cause of it.
Well, it seemed like given how close this is, if he were to moderate, like most candidates do in a general, it may not even be a contest right now. Pete, do these kinds of things, these John Kelly comments, matter to swing voters, you think?
I think there's a very small slice of independent voters and an even smaller slice of Republicans who do find January 6th to have been repugnant. I knocked on a door of an 89-year-old guy in St. Joe, Michigan, blue-collar neighborhood. And he said, I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years. I'm a lifelong Republican. and I'm never voting for that guy. And it was because of January 6th, and it was because he was an election poll worker for 40 years. And he said, I'm voting straight Democrat. There are not a lot of those people, but I think this closing message that includes abortion, which is very motivating to the Democratic base, that talks about the economic difference, about she's going to cut middle-class taxes, he's going to only cut them for the wealthy, and this piece about democracy, whether you cage it as General Kelly did, or you talk about January 6th, or calling veterans, suckers and losers. In a race that is this close, those little marginal categories can spell the difference. It's also democracy is along with abortion, very motivating for Democrats.
All right, it's going to be a very busy few weeks for the both of you. Stay in touch with us. We're going to need your expertise in the weeks ahead. Pat Beatty, Pete Jean Greco, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Paris.
Coming up on Paris on Politics.
A view from the ground in the battleground states of Wisconsin and Michigan.
Fox Local, your smart TV source for streaming Fox 32 News. No antenna, no subscriptions. Good Day Chicago, the news at 9, and more.
Thanks for waking up with us on Good Day Chicago at 7.
Severe weather coverage, special events, live and unfiltered.
We do still have that tornado warning in effect.
And Fox 32 favorites on demand.
Is this a role that you like, kind of going on the attack?
This is like the trade of the century that we're going to continue to talk about.
Fox 32 on Fox Local. Download now on all major streaming platforms.
The viewer in the morning really needs to have a good feeling for what it's going to be like for the rest of the day.
I've got 3 kids myself, so I set out their clothes Monday through Friday, which you can do too based on our 7-day forecast. The last thing that you want to have to think about is, what is my kid going to be wearing to school? What do I need in the morning?
Having grown up here, having spent about 30 years in this market predicting the weather, you not only get really familiar with the weather, but with the needs of your audience. And that's what it means to be the weather authority.
And now for a view from the ground from 2 of the most tightly contested swing states, Wisconsin and Michigan. We are joined by Jason Calvi, political reporter from Fox 6 Milwaukee, and Amy Lang, anchor from Fox 2 Detroit. Always great to talk to both of you. Amy, I'll start with you. The polling averages in your state show that it's basically a dead heat. Trump or Harris might be up within a percentage point depending on the poll. Does that track, Amy, with what you're seeing on the ground?
Well, they are certainly concerned about the polling because both of these candidates have been here pretty much nonstop. And I know there's been a lot of traffic in Wisconsin as well. But, we've had Kamala Harris here. We've had the former president, Barack Obama. He and Eminem were here earlier in the week. We also, have seen Trump here. We also have Vance here today. So it's a constant. Our state is just, one after another with these visits. So, in terms of what people are feeling on the ground, I know I can tell you that we've got a lot of, absentee voters who have turned in their ballots already, more than 1 million. And we have early voting starting throughout the state this weekend. It already started in Detroit. So early in-person voting ballots coming in there already. It's all over the headlines, whether it be in the paper or commercials, on the television. I mean, these advertisements are heavy. They are coming at our viewers nonstop. So definitely both campaigns spending a lot of money here. And, it is, as you said, a very, very tight race.
So Fox 2 Detroit seeing all that campaign advertising money. We're not really seeing that here at Fox 32 Chicago. Jason, same deal in Wisconsin. It's pretty much a dead heat. What are you seeing at the rallies that you're attending and on the ground?
Yeah, Paris, so right now we're at one of the early voting sites in Milwaukee. So far in Wisconsin, as of this morning, the Wisconsin Elections Commission reported 191,000 people have voted in person early. That started just on Tuesday, so we're just a few days into early voting in Wisconsin. Already 191,000 people, and you can see these people voting here in Milwaukee. We all had several polling places that actually had long lines the first 2 or 3 days of early voting, where people came out to vote. They had to wait. It was in one of the suburban cities, and we saw people waiting an hour and a half to cast their vote.
Talking about some of those last-minute messages, the former president recently denigrated Detroit in one of his rallies. Is that something that plays well throughout Michigan, throughout the suburbs, Grosse Pointe or Harbor Country or Kalamazoo?
I don't think that has really been taken lightly or well by people here. As you know, Detroit has had such, a comeback in recent years, and a statement like that, I think for a lot of people who are here, who've been part of this journey, who've witnessed this comeback, and there's still a ways to go. Don't get me wrong, but we're really having a bit of that renaissance that we had for so long been promised, and I think that kind of a statement leads people to think maybe he's a little bit out of touch with what's really happening on the ground here.
No doubt Detroit is always a fun city to visit. Jason, interesting endorsement recently. The Republican mayor of Waukesha, which is pretty much a GOP stronghold, as I understand, he came out in favor of Harris. Do you think something like that has an impact on voters?
It's really hard to say if an endorsement like that is going to sway these voters. But the big question really is when you looked at that Republican primary for president back in April here in Wisconsin, 78,000 Republican primary voters cast a vote for Nikki Haley, who at that time wasn't even in the race. Now, since that primary, she's come out and strongly endorsed the former president and asked her supporters to back former President Trump. When you look at Waukesha, that's it's the largest number of Republican voters in the state of Wisconsin, so they call it really a crucial county. Former President Trump won that city by about 11 points back in 2016. His lead shrunk in that city in 2020. He won it by about 5.5 points. You can see some shrinking of his support in the city of Waukesha.
Similar situation in Michigan. The former Republican Congressman Fred Upton, and he represents our viewing area, Harbor Country, Benton Harbor, St. Joe's, that area. He endorsed Kamala Harris as well. Do you think that kind of thing would persuade some of those undecideds that are still left out there?
Well, I think, he certainly is someone who has been quite critical of the former president. I mean, he voted to impeach him, and he was, among a few people, who actually did do that. So will this sway anyone? It's hard to say, but they are definitely going after those undecided voters. We saw earlier this week that Kamala Harris, the vice president, was here with former Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney said she's never voted for a Democrat in her life, but she is right now for Kamala Harris. And same thing with Fred Upton. He's never voted for a Democrat before either, but says the chaos of Trump just cannot get back in the White House. And so will his words, will his actions, hold any sway? Remains to be seen. Definitely could. But again, it's just so close to call.
Yeah, Jason Calvi, Amy Lang, best of luck to you over the next couple of weeks. And I get the feeling we may not know the results in your states on election night. So we're going to be watching your reporting very closely. Thank you so much for being with us.
Coming up on Paris on Politics.
A civic watchdog on how Chicago can close a $1 billion budget deficit.
Discover Chicago's hidden gems and untold tales.
If you look up, odds are you're seeing our work.
They have such an intense and fierce look when they swoop down and grab a fish.
3, 2, 1, go!
Fox 32's photographers share the stories they've captured with you.
Fountain jet shoots up about 150 feet. Our designers, the sky is their canvas.
See Chicago through their unique lens. Streaming now at Fox 32 on Fox Local. Download Fox Local on these streaming platforms and start watching. Chicago Sports Insiders.
I am so excited. This is gold right now. It's gold.
Streaming now on your smart TV at Fox 32 on Fox Local, your home of the Bears team.
Every Bears game will be must-see TV.
Following every step of a historic season.
Hardcore on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Download Fox Local and get in the game now.
Touchdown, Bears!
Search Fox Local on these streaming platforms and start watching today.
Tax hikes, spending cuts, borrowing. Oh my. Those are usually the three main options to plug a giant budget deficit, much like the one the city of Chicago faces right now. Prominent fiscal watchdog group, the Civic Federation, is out with its own recommendations to help the city shore up the $989 million gap for the next year. And some of those ideas include mandatory furloughs for city employees, suspension of the supplemental pension payment, hiking the garbage collection fee, legalizing video gaming, a congestion tax, a grocery tax, and many more. And joining us to discuss these is Civic Federation President Joe Ferguson. Joe Ferguson, always good to talk to you. We're going to get to some of those specific options you laid out. But first off, can the city actually close a nearly $1 billion budget gap without property tax hikes?
Our point is that question should be asked, and that question should be answered, and the answer to that question should be accountable. Potentially, yes. It's a political decision, but we should not default to what we have all internalized over the years is first place we go is for property taxes, because we are not well situated for that for a number of reasons laid out in the report. We're in the middle of a triennial reassessment. Already, we know that there are additional burdens on residences. We know that commercial real estate values are suppressed. We know that the assessors' new assessments are resulting in exponential burdens that are inequitable in that they are visited most on people in poor, underinvested neighborhoods. And CPS, which has its own financial fiscal crisis, relies much more heavily on property taxes and necessarily is going to have to go there. The city should make that the last resort.
So property taxpayers are pretty beleaguered right now. So let's go through some of the options you mentioned. Furloughs. A lot of union workers are not going to be happy with that one.
Yeah, no, of course. And a couple of things. First, before furloughs, I want to jump one before furloughs. The city has upwards of 3,000 vacancies that it carries from year to year to year. If you hold the vacancies on the books, you actually have to find money for them. That money over the years tends to be the pools that we draw from when we do not do our budgeting in an appropriate way. So things like judgments, things like overtime. That's a first place to look. There are a number of means of going about that. Cutting vacancies, one, or two, simply entering a legitimate budgetary accounting entry that says we're not going to hire. But the city has never been called to account for its failure to actually say what it's going to do with an enormous number of vacancies.
So get those vacancies off the books.
Second, get the vacancies off the books or remove them from the current fiscal year, 2025. Second is furloughs. When I joined the city as Inspector General, we were in the middle of a multi-year furlough, dealing with the Great Recession as a result of the collapse of the mortgage industry and the collapse of tax revenues. And that was, in essence, a 10% furlough on non-essential employees across the board. We know how to do it. It's much easier to do that than it is to specify you're going to furlough this group versus that group, you're going to cut vacancies from this group versus that group. It gets you out of the Game of Thrones situation with the unions.
All right, so across the board furloughs. You also recommend, and this is surprising, don't make this extra supplemental pension payment that's been made the last few years. The reason that mayors have made that is because those pension funds are so dry that they need to keep pace so that the city doesn't go bankrupt. You say skip that this year.
So I play a lawyer in the movies. That's my past. I'm going to say we don't make recommendations affirmatively. We make suggestions for consideration, and that should be one of the considerations. Simply, if you put it in the context of property taxes being a last resort, we know the last few years, and we have the Civic Federation and others have lauded the city for making these supplemental payments above what's legally required. Anyone criticizing the suggestion that we hold back some or all of the supplemental payments because we're going back to the old days? No, the city is actually making its legally mandated payments. We're talking above and beyond that. Last year, it was over $300 million. And if we're talking about $1 billion deficit and we do not want to put pressure on the taxpayers, particularly the property taxpayers, that's a place that we should be looking.
That's real money. Speaking of real money, garbage collection fees, you're saying perhaps think about hiking those. How much much money could the city get from that?
So going back again to my old Inspector General days, we issued a report back in 2011. Rahm Emanuel used that as the basis for introducing fee-based garbage collection. Way back in 2011, when we did that analysis and said, if you did it comparable to other cities and how they do it, back at that time, it would have been about $100 million more that came to the city. Rahm set it at a low entry level with the notion that we were going to, every couple of years, reassess and evaluate that actual fee. We haven't done that, and we're going into our 9th year. We haven't done that. That would be, on a rough back of the envelope, another $120 million.
Has the mayor's office been receptive to some of this? Have you talked to him?
The mayor's office, it depends on how you define the mayor's office, and that in itself is a shifting landscape, which I'm sure you've been reporting on.
A lot of people leaving, coming and going, yeah.
But there's good dialogue with the budget office, and, you know, on the front end of all of this, a number of forms of conversation, for which the budget director, you know, again, I'm going to go back to my old IG days. She says, we're looking at nothing you haven't talked about already. So, you know, none of these things are going to be foreign to them or a surprise, but it actually elevates it for the media and for the public, and most of all for the city council to understand there's a conversation to be had rather than a passive reception of a budget.
And we do see some city council members throwing out their ideas and acting like an actual legislative branch these days. You mentioned CPS. You've been critical of this $300 million loan that CTU and the mayor wants to help fund a new CTU contract and pension payment. Why do you think that loan is so problematic?
It's deficit borrowing. It's deficit borrowing, which essentially renders it, and it has been not inappropriately referred to by some public commentators as a payday loan. Higher rates, but we all have to recognize that CPS's bond rating, its credit rating, is already junk status. So that makes it an even higher matter. So we're borrowing to cover a deficit, and we're borrowing at higher rates, which means more money now, more money paid over the long run, and we still haven't addressed the looming deficit that we're going to face from two things: the actual cost of the CTU contract, not just the remainder of this year, but for the years that follow. And my expectation is that will be backloaded. We'll have a modest level in the vicinity of $125 to $200 million cost for this year, and in the back years is where we're really going to get whacked. This loan has no consideration for any future years where we know there is a mounting deficit there as well.
All right, you threw out a lot of numbers out there, Joe, but taxpayers pay attention, because if you live in Chicago, you are paying all of these costs. Joe Ferguson with the Civic Federation, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's our show for this week. Enjoy your weekend and stay up to date on all the news you need with Fox Chicago on air and online. Whether Jaden Daniels starts or not, the Bears are going to take command over the Commanders. So long, everyone.